I'm a freelance photographer, and last fall I was driving through rural Pennsylvania on my way to a wedding shoot in Pittsburgh. I'd been on the road for about 7 hours, and around 11 p.m., I realized I was too exhausted to keep going. My eyes were getting heavy, and I'd already drifted onto the rumble strip twice. I needed to find a place to crash. The problem was, I was in the middle of nowhere. Just empty 2-lane highway cutting through dense forest. No gas stations, no rest stops, nothing. I was starting to think I'd have to pull over and sleep in my car when I finally saw it. A motel sign, half the bulbs burned out, but I could still make out the words Pine Valley Motor Lodge. I pulled into the gravel parking lot. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. Single-story L-shaped building, maybe 20 rooms total, painted this faded yellow color that looked gray in the dark. There were only 3 other cars in the lot, all of them looking as run down as the building itself. The office was in the corner unit. I walked in and immediately got hit with this smell, like old cigarettes and pine air freshener trying to cover up mildew. Behind the desk was this woman, maybe in her 60s, watching a small TV with terrible reception. She barely looked at me when I walked in. I asked for a room and she said $70. I handed her my credit card, but she shook her head and said cash only. I should have left right then, but I was so tired I just didn't care anymore. I pulled out $80 from my wallet and she gave me back a 10 and a key attached to a diamond-shaped plastic tag with the number 12 on it. She didn't say anything else, just went back to watching her fuzzy TV show. No welcome, no information about checkout time, nothing. I took the key and headed back outside. Room 12 was at the far end of the building, last door on the right. The parking lot lights didn't reach that far, so I had to use my phone flashlight to find the lock. The key was old and the lock was stiff. I had to jiggle it around for a good 30 seconds before I heard it click and the door finally opened. I stepped inside and felt along the wall for the light switch. When the lights came on, I just stood there for a second, taking it in. The room was exactly what you'd expect. Worn brown carpet with stains I didn't want to think about. A queen bed with a floral comforter that looked like it came from a thrift store. Dark wood paneling on the walls, and a CRT television sitting on a dresser that had cigarette burns on top. There was a small bathroom to my left, a closet with no door, and a window with heavy curtains that were already pulled shut. The air in the room was stale and cold, like nobody had stayed there in weeks. I closed the door behind me and tried to lock it. The deadbolt was one of those old ones where you had to turn the little knob, but it wouldn't budge. I tried forcing it, but it felt like it was rusted in place. The chain lock was missing entirely, just 2 screw holes where it used to be. Great, I thought. A room with a broken lock in the middle of nowhere. But I was so exhausted that I convinced myself it was fine. The door closed tight at least, and nobody knew I was here anyway. I kicked off my shoes, plugged in my phone to charge, and collapsed onto the bed without even pulling back the covers. The mattress was lumpy, and the whole bed frame creaked when I moved, but I didn't care. I set an alarm for 6 a.m. and closed my eyes. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but then I heard it again. Footsteps. Someone was walking back and forth right outside my door. I stayed completely still, listening. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, pacing from one end of the door to the other, then back again. I looked at my phone. It was 2:47 a.m. Maybe it's just another guest, I told myself. Maybe someone's having a smoke outside. But the footsteps didn't move away. They just kept pacing back and forth, right outside my door. Then they stopped. I held my breath, waiting. That's when I heard the door handle start to turn. My heart jumped into my throat. I watched the handle slowly rotate, then stop. It rotated back the other way. Then again. Someone was testing the door, seeing if it was unlocked. I wanted to yell out, ask who was there, but something stopped me. Some instinct told me that drawing attention to myself was the wrong move. I just stayed frozen in that bed, watching the door handle move back and forth. Then it stopped. For a few seconds there was nothing, just silence. That's when I heard breathing. Someone was standing right on the other side of that door, breathing heavily. I could hear it clearly through the cheap door. It was labored, raspy breathing, like whoever it was had just been running. I slowly reached for my phone, thinking I should call the front desk or maybe the cops, but my hand was shaking so badly I almost knocked it off the nightstand. The breathing continued. Then I heard a voice, low and muffled but definitely speaking. At first, I couldn't make out what it was saying, but then I realized it was repeating the same thing over and over. Let me in. Let me in. Let me in. It was a man's voice, flat and emotionless. Not angry, not scared, just stating it like a fact. Let me in. Let me in. Let me in. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the front desk number that was written on a card next to the lamp. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to dial it. It rang and rang and rang. Nobody picked up. The voice outside kept going. Let me in. Let me in. Let me in. I hung up and dialed again. Still no answer. I was about to call the cops when suddenly the voice stopped. The breathing stopped. Everything went silent. I waited, listening for any sound, but there was nothing. Whoever had been outside my door was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat up in bed with my back against the headboard, phone in hand, watching that door until the sun started coming up. Around 6:30 a.m., when there was finally enough light outside, I grabbed my stuff and got out of there. I went to the office to complain and maybe get my money back, but the same woman was there and she looked at me like I was crazy when I told her what happened. She said nobody else was staying in that section of the motel and that I must have been dreaming. But I know what I heard. I know someone was outside that door trying to get in. And when I walked back to my car, I noticed something I hadn't seen in the dark the night before. Right next to my door, on the wall, someone had scratched something into the paint. It was hard to read, but I could just make it out. It said, "He never left." I got in my car and drove away as fast as I could. I don't know what that meant and I don't want to know. All I know is I'll never stay at a roadside motel again, especially one where the locks don't work. This happened to me about 3 years ago. I was driving from Texas to Colorado to visit my sister, and I'd planned to do the whole drive in one day. Bad idea. By the time I hit New Mexico, it was almost midnight, and I was completely wiped out. I pulled off the interstate at some small town I'd never heard of. Can't even remember the name now. There was a motel right off the exit, one of those old independent places, not a chain. The sign said Desert Rose Inn and showed a cartoon cactus wearing a cowboy hat. The parking lot was mostly empty. I parked near the office and went inside. There was a young guy behind the counter, maybe early 20s, playing on his phone. When I walked in, he looked up and seemed almost surprised to see a customer. I asked for a room and he said they had plenty available. $45 for the night. I paid cash and he handed me a key card. At least they'd upgraded from actual keys. He told me I was in room 8, around the back of the building. I thanked him and headed out. The motel was shaped like a horseshoe, with the office and parking lot in the open end. I had to walk all the way around to the back where room 8 was located. It was darker back there, with only one working light above the ice machine. The room was standard motel setup. 2 double beds, a TV, A small table with 2 chairs, bathroom, the usual. But there was something off about it that I noticed right away. It was too cold, like way too cold. I checked the AC unit under the window and it wasn't even on. I turned on the heater instead and started unpacking my overnight bag. That's when I noticed the mirror. It was a full-length mirror mounted on the wall next to the bathroom door, and there was something wrong with it. The reflection looked slightly off, like the angle didn't quite match up with where I was standing. I stood in front of it and waved my hand. My reflection waved back, but there was a delay. Just a fraction of a second, but definitely noticeable. I thought maybe I was just tired and seeing things, so I ignored it and got ready for bed. I brushed my teeth, changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt, and climbed into the bed closest to the door. I turned off the lights and tried to sleep, but something kept bothering me. It took me a minute to realize what it was. The room was still freezing cold. The heater had been running for 20 minutes, but it hadn't made any difference. My breath was visible in the air. I got up and checked the heater again. It was blowing hot air, but somehow the room was getting colder instead of warmer. That's when I looked at the mirror and froze. In the darkness, I could just barely see a reflection in it. But it wasn't my reflection. There was someone standing in front of the mirror, facing it. A woman with long dark hair, wearing what looked like a white nightgown. I flipped the light switch. The room lit up, and the mirror showed exactly what it should. My rumpled bed, the other empty bed, the table, the TV. No woman. Just my normal reflection looking back at me, terrified. I turned the lights back off. Slowly, after my eyes adjusted, I looked at the mirror again. The woman was back. She was standing in the same spot, perfectly still, staring into the mirror. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. I could see her reflection, but when I looked at the actual spot where she should be standing, there was nothing there. She only existed in the mirror. I turned the lights back on, and she vanished again. I kept the lights on for a while, trying to calm down and convince myself I was seeing things from exhaustion. But the room just kept getting colder and colder. I could see frost forming on the inside of the window. I decided to try to sleep with the lights on. I climbed back into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin, but I couldn't stop glancing at that mirror. As long as the lights were on, it showed a normal reflection. But I had this horrible feeling that if I turned them off, she'd be there again. Around 3 a.m., the power went out. The room went completely black, and the heater stopped running. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight, but before I could find it, I heard something. Footsteps, coming from inside the room, bare feet on carpet, walking slowly toward my bed. I finally found my phone and turned on the flashlight. The room was empty, but when I shined the light toward the mirror, I saw her. The woman was no longer standing in front of it. She was walking. In the mirror, I watched her cross the room, moving toward the bed I was lying in. But when I looked at the actual room, there was nothing there. Only in the reflection could I see her getting closer and closer. I jumped out of bed and ran for the door, fumbling with the key card in the darkness. The door finally beeped and unlocked. I threw it open and ran out into the night, not stopping until I reached my car. I sat in my car with the doors locked, engine running, heater on full blast, waiting for the sun to come up. When it was finally light out, I went back to the room. The power was back on. Everything looked normal. I quickly grabbed my stuff and checked out. The same guy from last night was still at the front desk. I asked him if anyone had ever complained about room 8 before, if anything strange had ever happened there. He got this weird look on his face and said he didn't know what I was talking about. But then, as I was leaving, he called out to me. When I turned around, he said one thing. "Don't tell anyone I said this, but I'd never stay in that room." I asked him why, but he just shook his head and went back to his phone. I got in my car and left, and I've never driven through that town again. Even now, I avoid mirrors in hotel rooms, because sometimes what you see in the reflection isn't what's really there. And sometimes, what's in the reflection is trying to find a way out. I used to work night shift at a motel off Interstate 40 in Tennessee. This was about 5 years ago when I was putting myself through community college. The job was perfect for my schedule. I'd work from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and the place was usually dead quiet. Maybe 1 or 2 people would check in during my entire shift. The motel was called the Sleepy Hollow Inn, and it was exactly what you'd expect. 30 rooms, a small office, a vending machine that barely worked, and a pool that had been drained and covered up years ago. We got a mix of travelers passing through and regulars who lived there long-term because they had nowhere else to go. My job was simple. Check in any late arrivals, answer the phone if anyone called from their room, and basically make sure nothing burned down. Most nights I just did homework behind the desk and watched whatever was on the small TV we had. But about 3 months into the job, something happened that made me quit. It started on a Tuesday night. It was raining, and around 1 a.m. this guy came in to check in. He looked to be in his 40s, wearing a soaked jacket and carrying a duffel bag. He said he'd been driving for hours and needed a place to crash. I checked him in and gave him the key to room 24. He paid cash, didn't ask for a receipt, and headed out into the rain. I watched him walk to his room, go inside and close the door. Nothing unusual. About an hour later, the phone at the desk rang. I picked it up and said, "Front desk." There was breathing on the other end, but nobody spoke. Then a voice, really quiet, said, "He's in my room." I asked who was calling and what room they were in. The voice said, "Room 24. There's someone in here with me. I can hear him breathing." I told him he was the only person staying in room 24, that he'd just checked in an hour ago. The voice got louder, more panicked. "No, you don't understand. I can hear him. He's standing right next to the bed." Then the line went dead. I tried calling the room back, but it just rang and rang. I didn't know what to do. It could be a prank, or maybe the guy was drunk or on something. But something about the fear in his voice made me nervous. I grabbed the master key and a flashlight and headed out to room 24. The rain was coming down hard, and I was soaked by the time I got there. I knocked on the door and called out, asking if everything was okay. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I used the master key and opened the door. The lights were off. I flipped the switch and the room lit up. It was empty. The bed was made. The TV was off. There was no duffel bag, no wet jacket, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I stood there confused, wondering if maybe I'd given him the wrong room number. But I'd watched him walk to room 24. I'd seen him go inside. I went back to the office and checked the registration. Room 24, paid for 1 night, checked in at 1:07 a.m. I called the room again. This time someone picked up on the first ring. That same quiet voice said, "Why did you let him in?" Then the line went dead again. I was really freaked out now. I went back to room 24 with the flashlight, and this time when I opened the door, the lights were already on. And someone was there. The guy was sitting on the edge of the bed, still wearing his wet jacket, holding his head in his hands. I asked if he was all right, if he was the one who'd called the front desk. He looked up at me, and his eyes were red like he'd been crying. He said, "I didn't call you. I just woke up and you were standing here." I told him I'd been here a minute ago and the room was empty. He looked at me like I was crazy. He stood up and showed me his duffel bag on the floor, his jacket hanging in the closet. He said he'd been asleep for the past hour and had no idea what I was talking about. I apologized and left, but something felt really wrong. Back in the office, I pulled up the security camera footage. We had one camera pointed at the parking lot and the room doors. I rewound to when the guy had checked in. There he was, walking to room 24 in the rain, going inside. But then, about 20 minutes later, the door opened again and he walked out. He got in his car and drove away. The camera showed his car leaving the parking lot at 1:31 a.m., but that was impossible. I'd just been in his room. He was there. I'd seen him sitting on the bed. I watched the footage again. At 2:47 a.m., a car pulled into the lot. It was the same car, same license plate. The same guy got out, walked to room 24, and went inside. He never left after that. I sat there trying to make sense of it. The same person had checked in twice. Or had he? I looked at the registration log again. There was only one entry for room 24. The phone rang. I picked it up and heard that same voice. "He's here again. Please help me." This time I could hear something else in the background. Another voice, talking, but I couldn't make out the words. I asked what room he was calling from. There was a pause, then he said, "I don't know. It says room 24, but I think I'm somewhere else. Nothing looks right." I told him to leave the room and come to the office. He said, "I tried. The door won't open. The windows won't open. I'm locked in." I was about to head back out there when I heard him scream. Not a word, just a pure scream of terror. Then the line went dead. I ran to room 24. The door was locked from the inside. I used the master key, but the deadbolt was engaged. I pounded on the door, yelling for him to open it. Nothing. I ran back to the office and called the cops. They arrived about 10 minutes later. 2 officers. I explained the situation and they went to room 24 with me. One of them knocked and announced they were police. No answer. He told me to open it, so I used the master key. The deadbolt wasn't engaged anymore. The door opened. The room was empty again. No person, no duffel bag, no wet jacket. The bed was perfectly made, like nobody had touched it. The bathroom was empty. Nothing. The officers searched the whole room, checked the closet, under the bed, everywhere. One of them asked me if I'd been drinking. I showed them the security footage, showed them the guy checking in, showed them him leaving and coming back. They watched it with confused expressions. One officer said, "So where is he now?" I had no answer. They took a report, but there wasn't much they could do. Nobody was missing. Nothing was stolen. Just a very weird situation. After they left, I sat in the office, staring at room 24. The lights were off. The door was closed. Around 5 a.m., just before sunrise, I saw something that made me pack up my stuff and quit on the spot. The door to room 24 opened. A figure stepped out. In the dim light, I could see it was the guy, wearing his wet jacket, carrying his duffel bag. He walked to where his car was parked, but there was no car there anymore. He stood there for a moment, looking around like he was lost. Then he turned and looked directly at the office window, directly at me. And even though I couldn't see his face clearly from that distance, I knew he was scared, terrified. He walked back to room 24 and went inside, closing the door behind him. I grabbed my keys, left a note saying I quit, and got out of there. I never went back, not even to pick up my last paycheck. I heard later that they had to close room 24 permanently. Too many complaints from guests, people hearing voices, seeing someone standing next to their bed, waking up in the middle of the night to find the room completely different from how they remembered it. But here's what really keeps me up at night. About a year after I quit, I was browsing online and came across an old news article. A man had been found dead in room 24 of the Sleepy Hollow Inn. Apparently, he took his life. His name matched the registration from that night. The same name, the same signature. I don't work night shifts anymore, and I never stay in room 24 of any motel, ever.